The chandelier above shimmered as the laughter of the wealthy echoed through the grand hall. Servers moved between the guests, balancing silver trays with crystal glasses filled to the brim. The scent of expensive cologne and aged wine filled the air, mingling with the soft melody played by the hired musicians in the corner. This wasn't just a party, it was a display of power, where only the elite gathered. Sophia adjusted her uniform, ensuring her black dress was wrinkle-free as she carefully placed a glass of champagne on a polished mahogany table. She had worked as a waitress for years, but nothing prepared her for a night like this. The mansion belonged to Raymond Carter, a billionaire known for his extravagant lifestyle and eccentric personality. Every year, he hosted a grand party, inviting celebrities, politicians, and the wealthiest figures in town. Tonight, she was just another faceless worker in the background, serving people who wouldn't even glance at her. But this time was different. Her 7-year-old son, Daniel, sat quietly in the staff area, clutching his worn-out backpack. He had nowhere else to go. No babysitter, no family, just the two of them surviving together. She had begged the manager to let him stay in the back while she worked. Between serving drinks, she stole glances at him, making sure he was okay. He was used to waiting, used to being quiet. But tonight, his wide, curious eyes kept darting toward the party, mesmerized by the glamour he had never seen before. A deep voice pulled her back to reality. "You there?" Sophia turned. Raymond Carter stood before her, his sharp blue eyes scanning her with curiosity. He was taller than she expected, his expensive suit fitting him like a second skin. The air around him carried an unshakable confidence, the kind only billionaires could afford. "You seem different from the others," he mused, swirling the golden liquid in his glass. She hesitated. "Excuse me, sir." He took a slow sip before smirking. "What's your name?" "Sophia." He nodded, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Tell me, Sophia, do you have a talent?" She frowned. "Sir?" "A special skill. Something unique." His gaze flickered toward the grand piano in the corner of the hall. "Can you play?" Her breath hitched. 1,000 memories rushed in, her father's voice teaching her, her fingers dancing across the ivory keys, the melodies that once filled her home. Music had been her escape before life tore it all away. Before poverty, before struggle, before everything that mattered was replaced by mere survival. She shook her head. "I haven't played in years." "Even better." Raymond's grin widened. "Let's see if talent ever really fades." Before she could protest, he clapped his hands. The chatter in the room softened as guests turned their attention toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight," he announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "Our lovely waitress, Sophia, will entertain us with a piece on the piano." A murmur spread through the crowd. Amusement flickered in their expressions. Sophia's heart pounded. This wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Eyes bore into her, waiting to be entertained. Some guests smirked, expecting a disaster. Others simply watched, detached and indifferent. She swallowed hard. From the corner, Daniel peeked out, his small hands gripping the edge of a chair. His expression was unreadable, worry, excitement, maybe even hope. For a brief moment, she considered refusing. She could shake her head, walk away, say she didn't remember how to play. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the weight of her past pressing against her ribs. Maybe it was the unspoken challenge in Raymond's smirk. Or maybe it was the realization that for the first time in years, someone was looking at her, not as a faceless worker, but as something more. She exhaled slowly and stepped toward the piano. The murmurs quieted. She sat, fingers hovering above the keys. They trembled. She pressed down. And the room fell silent. A single note filled the grand hall, reverberating off the walls. Sophia's fingers lingered on the keys as the weight of 100 gazes bore down on her. The murmur of the crowd had vanished, replaced by a tense silence. Even the waitstaff, who had been moving about unnoticed, paused to watch. She could feel the skepticism in the air. No one expected a waitress to play. They anticipated a clumsy performance, a source of mild amusement before they returned to their expensive wine and conversations about stocks, art, and luxury vacations. Sophia closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Then, she played. A melody poured from her fingertips, delicate yet powerful. It started as a whisper, the notes flowing together like a gentle stream. Then, it swelled, building into something richer, deeper. The song carried sorrow and longing, each note wrapping around the next with aching familiarity. The crowd's amusement faded. Whispers of mockery stilled. Raymond Carter, standing with his drink in hand, arched an eyebrow. The smirk on his lips disappeared. Sophia didn't notice. She wasn't in the room anymore. The mansion, the chandeliers, the wealthy guests, they all faded into nothing. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. Her mind drifted to a childhood long gone, a time when her father would sit beside her, guiding her hands across the keys. "Feel the music, not just the notes," he used to say. "Let it tell your story." And tonight, she did. Her story was woven into every note, the years of struggle, the exhaustion of working double shifts, the quiet nights of holding Daniel close when they had nowhere to go. The music was her voice, speaking in a language no words could capture. A sharp gasp broke through the silence. A woman in an emerald gown clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide. A few guests exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Others simply stared, transfixed. Raymond stepped forward. Sophia's fingers slowed, the final note hanging in the air before dissolving into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, applause. But it wasn't the polite, half-hearted clapping that accompanied most forced performances. It was thunderous, echoing through the hall with a force that stunned her. She looked up, dazed. People were on their feet. Even the skeptics, the ones who had smirked moments ago, now watched her with something close to admiration. Raymond approached, his expression unreadable. That was, he hesitated, as if searching for the right word. Then, quietly, unexpected. Sophia swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear. She wasn't meant to be the center of attention. But before she could say anything, a voice interrupted. "Who taught you to play?" An older man in a tailored navy suit stepped forward. His silver hair was combed neatly, and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses rested on the bridge of his nose. There was something familiar about him, though Sophia couldn't place it. My father," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression shifted. His eyes darkened, as if she had just unlocked something buried deep in his memory. Before he could say another word, a small voice broke through the tension. "Mommy." Daniel rushed forward, his face beaming with excitement. That was amazing. He wrapped his arms around her, unbothered by the stares of the elite guests. Sophia's heart clenched. She had forgotten he was watching. Raymond chuckled, stepping back. Well. That was the highlight of the evening. He turned to the bartender. "Get this woman a drink." Sophia shook her head. I should get back to work." "You think you're going back to serving drinks after that performance?" Raymond scoffed. "Sophia, you just stunned a room full of millionaires. You're not walking away from this moment." Unease twisted in her stomach. Before she could respond, the older man in the navy suit took another step closer. His gaze, sharp and calculating, never left her. "You said your father taught you." He murmured. "What was his name?" Sophia hesitated. "Jonathan Hayes." A sharp inhale. A flicker of recognition. The man took another step forward, his hands trembling slightly. "My name is Richard Alden," he said. "And I knew your father." The room seemed to shrink. The voices of the other guests faded into static. Sophia's pulse thundered in her ears. Richard Alden. She had heard that name before. A long time ago. She just didn't know where. And as he stared at her, as if seeing a ghost, she realized. This night was far from over, the name hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Richard Alden. Sophia's pulse quickened as she searched her memory for where she had heard it before. It wasn't just a name, it carried weight, significance, something buried deep in her past. The older man stared at her, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the chandelier's glow. His expression wasn't just one of recognition, it was something deeper, something unsettled. "You knew my father?" Sophia's voice came out uneven, the words foreign on her tongue. Richard Alden exhaled sharply, nodding. "More than that." He hesitated, his fingers curling into a loose fist. "Jonathan Hayes was one of the most brilliant pianists I ever met. And he paused as if unsure whether to say more. The room seemed to blur. Sophia barely noticed Raymond watching with an amused curiosity. The other guests had gone back to their conversations, but a few still stole glances, intrigued by the unfolding moment. Her heart pounded. Her father, a brilliant pianist? She had known he loved music, had taught her everything he could before life had ripped them apart. But she had never heard anyone speak of him like this, as if he had been someone of significance. "You must be mistaken," she said, shaking her head. "My father was, he wasn't famous." Richard Alden let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "He should have been." His voice softened. "I lost touch with him many years ago. But if you're his daughter, there's something you need to know." The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, Raymond interjected, his sharp gaze flicking between them. "Well, this just got interesting." He leaned against the piano, arms crossed. "Sophia, it seems you're at the center of more than just a good performance tonight." She ignored him. Her eyes stayed on Richard. A deep unease curled in her stomach. There was something in his expression, an urgency, a hesitation, like he wasn't sure whether to say what was on his mind. Daniel clutched her arm. "Mom?" She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I have to talk to you," Richard said. "Not here. Not in front of all these people." His voice lowered, his tone edged with something she couldn't quite place. "It's about your father. And something he left behind." Sophia's breath caught. Something he left behind? Her father had never owned much. They had struggled for as long as she could remember, moving from place to place, barely making ends meet. What could he have possibly left behind that mattered now? "Please." Richard's voice softened. "Meet me outside in 10 minutes. Sophia hesitated. Everything about this felt strange, too sudden, too surreal. But something inside her whispered that she needed to listen. Raymond tilted his head, clearly entertained. "Secrets and mysteries? Now you really have my attention." Sophia shot him a glance but said nothing. Her mind was already racing. 10 minutes. That was all she had to decide whether she would walk away or step into something far bigger than she understood. Outside, the cool night air bit at her skin as she stood by the marble fountain, Daniel at her side. The stars above were clear, undisturbed by city lights. Richard arrived moments later, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. "You have your father's hands," he said suddenly, glancing at her fingers. Sophia blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He smiled faintly. "I remember them well. His fingers were made for music. Just like yours." She wasn't sure what to say to that. Richard exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He suddenly looked much older, weighed down by something unseen. I should start from the beginning, he said. Your father and I, we were more than acquaintances. We were partners. Sophia stiffened. Partners? In music, Richard clarified. But also, in something else. His gaze darkened. Your father wasn't just a pianist. He was a composer. A genius, really. But his work, his final work, was never finished. Sophia felt Daniel shift beside her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. Richard continued, his voice hushed. Before he disappeared, he was working on something extraordinary. A piece unlike any other. A composition that, he paused, as if considering his words carefully. Let's just say, there were people who wanted it. Desperately. Sophia frowned. What are you saying? Richard met her gaze. I'm saying your father's music wasn't just music. It was something far more valuable. And I think you may be the only person left who can find it. Sophia's pulse hammered in her chest. This was insane. It didn't make sense. Her father had never spoken of anything like this. He had never mentioned a composition, a lost piece of music, or people who wanted it. Yet, deep in her memory, there was something, a faint whisper of a melody he used to hum under his breath, a tune that had never had an ending. She swallowed hard. You're telling me, she said slowly, that my father wrote something important, and now it's missing? Richard nodded. And I believe someone doesn't want it to be found. A cold chill ran down her spine. Daniel looked up at her, eyes wide. Mom, what if Grandpa left it for you? Sophia hesitated. What if? What if everything Richard was saying was true? What if the melody she barely remembered was more than just a childhood memory? And what if someone had been waiting for years to make sure it was never played again? The distant sound of laughter from the mansion suddenly felt hollow. Something was wrong. And for the first time in her life, Sophia realized. Her father's past was about to become her future. Part 4, Shadows of the Past. Sophia stared at Richard, her heart pounding. The weight of his words pressed down on her like a storm cloud. You're saying my father's music wasn't just music? Richard gave a slow nod. It was more than that. It was something dangerous. Daniel clung to her side, his small fingers tightening around her wrist. Mom, what if Grandpa left something for you? Something important? Sophia swallowed. She had spent years trying to let go of the past. But the past, it seemed, had never let go of her. A secret worth hiding. She took a deep breath. If my father left something behind, where would it be? Richard hesitated. That's the problem. No one knows. But if the composition still exists, someone out there wants it, and they won't stop looking. A chill ran down her spine. Why? It's just music. Richard's expression darkened. It was revolutionary. Something the world had never heard before. I don't know all the details, but before your father disappeared, he was scared. He told me someone was watching him. Sophia's stomach twisted. Her father had been afraid? She had never seen him as anything but strong, kind, and filled with music. Raymond's voice broke the silence. Well, well. Sophia turned sharply to see him step from the shadows, clapping slowly. This is turning into quite the story. Her hands balled into fists. Were you listening? Raymond smirked. Hard not to, considering how loud you were. Sophia glared. This has nothing to do with you. Raymond raised an eyebrow. Oh, but it does. A missing masterpiece? A musical mystery? That kind of thing makes people very rich, or very dead. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. Richard spoke first. You seem to know a lot about this. Raymond shrugged. I know people. And I know that lost compositions, especially ones with rumored secrets, don't just stay lost. Sophia's mind raced. Secrets? A memory stirred deep inside her. As a child, she had always heard her father humming a melody that never seemed to end. A tune that felt familiar yet unfinished. Could that be it? The past comes alive. She turned back to Richard. You think my father left something hidden? But where? Richard exhaled. That's what we have to figure out. Raymond smirked. Better be quick. If I've heard whispers about it, others have too. A cold shiver ran down Sophia's back. Was this a warning? Or a threat? A gust of wind rustled the trees, filling the night with eerie whispers. She had stepped into something far bigger than she had imagined. And there was no turning back now. The world felt heavier around Sophia. The past wasn't just a memory, it was alive, breathing, waiting for her to uncover it. But was she ready? Daniel's small voice broke her thoughts. Mom, do you remember Grandpa's song? Sophia blinked. What? Daniel hesitated. The one you hum sometimes. A chill ran down her spine. She did hum a tune sometimes, a soft melody that had no end. It had been part of her childhood, something her father played often. But she had never thought about it, it had just been there, like an old lullaby. Richard's eyes sharpened. You remember something? Sophia hesitated. Maybe. Raymond smirked. Well, don't keep us in suspense. Hum it. Sophia glanced at Daniel. He nodded eagerly. Taking a breath, she closed her eyes and let the melody slip from her lips. A slow, haunting tune. Soft but heavy, like the weight of forgotten sorrow. When she finished, silence followed. Richard was staring at her. That's it. Sophia's pulse quickened. What do you mean? That's the melody Jonathan used to play. The one people were looking for. She felt the ground shift beneath her. But, it's just a tune. Raymond let out a low whistle. Or maybe it's not. A secret buried in music. Richard paced, his mind working. If your father left something behind, he wouldn't have written it down in the open. But if you know the tune, the answer might be in the notes. Sophia felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Music. The thing her father loved most. The thing he had feared. Daniel tugged at her sleeve. Mom, what if Grandpa hid something inside the music? Sophia's breath hitched. Hidden inside the music? Could that even be possible? Raymond rubbed his chin. People have used music to hide messages before. Composers in history have encoded names, dates, even entire sentences in notes. Maybe your father did the same. Sophia shook her head. But why? What was he hiding? Richard's expression was grim. Something powerful. The search begins. Sophia's hands trembled. If the answer was in the music, then she needed to see it, to play it. But there was a problem. I don't have the full composition, she admitted. I only know the melody from memory. Richard's eyes flickered with thought. Maybe there's another way. Sophia turned to him. What do you mean? Richard exhaled. Your father's things, do you still have any of them? Sophia's mind raced. She had thrown away most of the past, trying to move on. But there was one thing she had never parted with. The old piano. It had been in storage for years. She hadn't touched it since she was a teenager. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. I still have his piano. Richard's face lit up. Then that's where we start. A race against time. A sudden noise made them all freeze. A rustling sound. A shadow shifting beyond the trees. Someone was watching. Sophia's blood ran cold. Raymond's voice was barely above a whisper. "We're not alone." The past wasn't just waiting for her. It was following her. The rustling sound in the trees sent a chill down Sophia's spine. Her breath caught as she turned toward the darkness beyond the clearing. Daniel clutched her hand tightly. Raymond was the first to react. He took a slow step forward, his body tense. "Who's there?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a warning. Silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was out there. Watching. Sophia's heart pounded. She felt Richard's hand on her arm, steadying her. He leaned in and whispered, "We need to leave. Now." She nodded. Gripping Daniel's hand, she turned toward the car. But before they could take another step, a voice cut through the night. "You're looking for something that doesn't belong to you." Sophia froze. The voice was deep, calm, but with an underlying threat. A figure stepped into the dim glow of the streetlight. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing. His eyes locked onto Sophia's. Richard's jaw clenched. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "That's not important. What is important is that you stop searching. Some things are meant to stay buried." Sophia swallowed. "Are you threatening me?" The man didn't blink. "I'm giving you a warning." His gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to her. "You don't want to put your family in danger, do you?" Sophia instinctively stepped in front of her son. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. Raymond crossed his arms. "You know, if you're trying to scare us, you're not doing a great job." The man smirked. "You don't know what you're getting into." Richard took a step forward. "And you don't know who you're dealing with." For a moment, no one moved. Then, without another word, the man turned and disappeared into the night. The moment he was gone, Sophia let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Richard turned to her. "We need to move. Fast." Sophia nodded. "The piano. If my father left anything behind, that's where it will be." Raymond exhaled. "Then let's get to it before anyone else does." The forgotten piano. Sophia's storage unit was a dusty, forgotten place filled with remnants of a life she had tried to leave behind. The moment she stepped inside, the scent of old wood and faded memories filled her lungs. Her father's piano sat in the corner, covered in a sheet. She hesitated before pulling it off. The polished wood was scratched and worn, but it was still beautiful. Richard ran his fingers over the keys. "This is it." Sophia sat down, her hands hovering over the keys. It had been years since she played, but the melody was still in her fingers, in her heart. Slowly, she began to play. The haunting tune echoed in the small space, filling it with something almost otherworldly. Richard listened intently. Raymond paced, deep in thought. Then Daniel gasped. "Mom, look!" Sophia stopped playing. "What is it?" Daniel pointed at the inside of the piano's lid. A small engraving, so faint it had almost gone unnoticed. Richard leaned in. "It's a sequence of notes." Sophia's heart pounded. "A code?" Raymond whistled. "Looks like your dad was smarter than we thought." The hidden message. Sophia grabbed a notepad and quickly copied the notes. "This must mean something." Richard nodded. "If we can decode it, we'll know what your father was hiding." But before they could analyze it further, a loud crash echoed through the storage unit. The door. Someone was outside. Raymond's expression turned deadly serious. "We have company." Sophia's hands clenched into fists. They had found the music, but now they had to fight to keep it. And whatever secrets her father had hidden inside it, someone was willing to kill for them. To be continued in Part 7. Part 7, The Notes of Deception. A loud crash echoed through the storage unit. The heavy metal door rattled as if someone had thrown their weight against it. Sophia's pulse surged. Daniel let out a small gasp, clinging to her arm. Richard's body tensed, his eyes darting toward the exit. Raymond moved quickly. "We need to get out of here." His voice was low, controlled, but urgent. Another bang. This time, the door handle twisted violently. Sophia's throat went dry. Whoever was outside wasn't just knocking. They were trying to get in. Richard grabbed Daniel's hand and whispered, "Stay close." Sophia looked at the piano, the coded notes now burned into her mind. They had come too far to walk away now. Whatever her father had hidden, someone wanted to bury it for good. Raymond pulled out a pocket knife and pointed toward the back of the unit. "There's another exit." Sophia's legs moved before she could think. She scooped up Daniel, and they rushed toward the rear door. Then, a deafening bang. The storage unit's main door flew open, slamming against the wall. 3 men stormed in. The chase begins. Sophia's heart pounded. The men were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by shadows. But their intent was clear. One of them barked, "Give it to us." Sophia took a step back. "Give what?" The man's eyes flicked to the piano. "The notes." Raymond positioned himself between them. "You're a little late, boys. We already found what we needed." The second man took a step forward. "Then hand it over." "Now." Richard's voice was cold. "Or what?" The leader smirked. "Or we take it." Sophia knew they had seconds before this turned into something violent. Without thinking, she grabbed Daniel's hand and ran. "Go!" Raymond shouted. They bolted for the back door. Sophia shoved it open, and the cold night air hit her like a slap. Footsteps thundered behind them. Raymond pushed Sophia forward. "Keep running." They raced down a narrow alley between storage units. The men were close, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. Daniel was gasping for breath, his small legs struggling to keep up. Sophia's grip tightened. "Almost there, baby. Just a little more." Ahead, a chain-link fence loomed. Raymond cursed under his breath. "We climb." Richard was already helping Daniel over the fence when a voice shouted behind them. "Stop them." A gunshot cracked through the air. Sophia ducked, shielding Daniel as her heart nearly stopped. Raymond swore and grabbed her arm. "Go, go, go." Richard hoisted Daniel over the fence, and Sophia scrambled after him. Her hands burned as she pulled herself up. Raymond was last, vaulting over just as another shot rang out. They hit the ground running. A parking lot stretched ahead of them, their car sitting at the far end. Richard yanked the keys from his pocket. "Get in." They piled into the car. Tires screeched as Richard floored the gas. The men disappeared into the night behind them. A code to crack. Sophia's hands trembled as she clutched the paper with the musical notes. Daniel leaned against her, his breath uneven. "Mom, who were they?" She stroked his hair. "Bad people, sweetheart." Raymond exhaled sharply. "People who know exactly what Jonathan left behind." Sophia's mind raced. "But what is it? We still don't know what these notes mean." Richard turned the car onto the highway. "We need an expert." Sophia's brow furrowed. "An expert?" Raymond nodded. "Someone who can analyze the music. If your father left a message inside the notes, we need someone who can read it. A memory stirred in Sophia's mind. I know someone. Richard glanced at her. Who? Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. My father's old friend. A composer. He used to visit us when I was little. Raymond smirked. Then that's where we're going. The final piece. The night stretched ahead of them. Sophia clutched the paper in her hands. The melody, the one she had hummed her whole life, was no longer just a song. It was a secret. And they weren't the only ones who wanted to uncover it. The tires screeched as Richard pulled the car into the driveway of a modest, ivy-covered house on the outskirts of the city. The headlights illuminated the old wooden door, where a brass nameplate read, Arthur Bellamy, composer and pianist. Sophia's fingers tightened around the paper. Her father's coded melody had led them here. Arthur Bellamy had been her father's closest friend, a man who understood music in ways few people did. Raymond turned in his seat. Are you sure about this? Sophia nodded. If anyone can decode this, it's Arthur. Richard shut off the engine. The night was eerily quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel stirred beside Sophia, rubbing his eyes. Mom, will Grandpa's friend help us? Sophia kissed the top of his head. I hope so, sweetheart. She stepped out of the car and approached the door. Her heart pounded as she knocked. A long pause followed before footsteps shuffled inside. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with wispy white hair and tired, knowing eyes. His gaze landed on Sophia, and his expression shifted from confusion to recognition. Sophia? His voice was soft, filled with surprise. She swallowed hard. Hello, Arthur. The hidden meaning. Arthur led them inside, where the scent of old books and sheet music filled the air. The walls were lined with framed compositions, yellowed with age. A grand piano sat in the center of the room, bathed in moonlight. He settled into a chair and gestured for them to sit. It's been years. I never expected to see you again. Sophia handed him the paper. I found this inside my father's piano. It's a melody, one he used to play for me. But I think it's more than that. Arthur adjusted his glasses and studied the notes. His fingers traced over them slowly. Then, without a word, he moved to the piano. The first note echoed through the room. Then another. The melody, haunting yet beautiful, filled the space. Arthur's brow furrowed as he played, his expression shifting from concentration to realization. When he finished, he turned to Sophia with wide eyes. This isn't just music, he whispered. It's a cipher. Sophia's breath caught. A cipher? Arthur nodded. Jonathan always had a brilliant mind. He encoded a message inside the notes. The spacing, the timing, it's all deliberate. Raymond leaned forward. Can you decipher it? Arthur exhaled. Yes. But it will take time. Sophia's hands trembled. We don't have much time. People are after this. Arthur nodded grimly and reached for a blank sheet of paper. Then let's get to work. The truth revealed. Minutes stretched into hours as Arthur meticulously broke down the melody. Numbers, letters, and symbols emerged from the music. Sophia's heart pounded with every scribbled note. Finally, Arthur leaned back, his face pale. My God. Richard tensed. What is it? Arthur looked at Sophia, his voice shaking. This is a bank account number. Sophia's breath hitched. A bank account? Arthur nodded. But not just any bank. This account is linked to a Swiss vault. Raymond let out a low whistle. Your father was hiding money? Arthur hesitated. Not just money. If I'm reading this right, this vault contains documents, evidence. Sophia's pulse quickened. Evidence of what? Arthur met her gaze. Corruption. Fraud. Possibly even murder. Silence filled the room. Sophia gripped the arms of her chair. You're telling me my father hid proof of a crime? And encoded it in a song? Arthur nodded. And whoever is after you, they want to make sure it never sees the light of day. The final showdown. Before anyone could speak, a crash shattered the quiet. The front door burst open. Sophia's blood ran cold. The men from the storage unit stormed inside, their eyes dark with rage. Step away from the piano, the leader snarled. Arthur stiffened, his hand gripping the edge of the piano. Richard positioned himself in front of Sophia and Daniel. Raymond's jaw clenched. The leader pointed at Sophia. Give us the notes. Now. Sophia's mind raced. She knew the truth now. The documents in that Swiss vault held secrets that could destroy powerful people. And these men would kill to keep them hidden. Her eyes darted to Arthur, who gave her the smallest nod. A silent message. She took a deep breath. Fine. She reached for the sheet of music. The men watched her every move. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she tore the paper in half. A guttural growl escaped the leader's throat. You stupid. Raymond lunged. A struggle broke out. Fists flew. A gun clattered to the ground. Sophia grabbed Daniel and ducked behind the piano. Richard tackled one of the men, sending him crashing into a bookshelf. Papers and books rained down. Arthur, despite his age, grabbed a lamp and swung it at the nearest attacker. In the chaos, Raymond managed to grab the discarded gun. He aimed it squarely at the leader. Back. Off. The leader hesitated, breathing hard. Then, with a glare, he muttered, You have no idea what you've done. Raymond's finger hovered over the trigger. Try me. The men exchanged looks. Then, slowly, they backed toward the door. The leader pointed at Sophia. This isn't over. Then they were gone. A new beginning. Silence fell over the room. Sophia sank onto the piano bench, her hands shaking. Arthur picked up the torn sheet of music and smiled faintly. Good thinking. Sophia exhaled. I didn't destroy the Real notes. I memorized them. Raymond grinned. Smart girl. Richard sat down beside her. So, what now? Sophia met his gaze. We go to Switzerland. Raymond chuckled. That's one hell of a trip. Arthur nodded. If Jonathan went through all this trouble, it means what's in that vault is important. The world deserves to know. Sophia glanced at Daniel, who was half asleep in her lap. She brushed his hair back. For the first time in years, she felt closer to her father. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning.